The Between, a science fiction story. The heat distortion shimmered across the abandoned highway like water over glass, and through it stepped Kess, as if emerging from behind a curtain that only they could see. The transition was seamless. One moment, they were elsewhere, in another space between spaces, and the next, their boots were touching cracked asphalt that radiated the day's accumulated warmth into the cooling dusk air. They stood still for a moment, letting their body remember what gravity felt like in this particular slice of reality. The weight settled differently here, more insistent, more real. That was usually a good sign. The rest stop stretched before them in the purple-orange light of approaching evening. It was one of those brutally functional highway stops from the 1990s. All concrete angles and brown brick, designed by someone who believed form should never, under any circumstances, acknowledge beauty. A pair of picnic tables sat under a pavilion with a roof that provided shade for no one. A dog waste station stood sentinel near a patch of grass that had gone wild and scraggly. The parking lot, large enough for 30 vehicles, held exactly 0. Above the main building, fluorescent lights buzzed behind yellowed plastic panels. Some flickered. Some had died years ago and never been replaced. Some glowed steady, which was somehow worse. It implied maintenance, care, someone who came by regularly to ensure these lights continued their vigil over nothing. Kess recognized this place immediately. Exit 47, they muttered, pulling out their device. It wasn't exactly a phone, though it had started life as one. A smartphone that Kess had found in a space that was trying very hard to be a Best Buy circa 2007. They'd modified it extensively since then, adding components that shouldn't exist. A circuit board made from crystallized time. A battery that ran on probability rather than lithium. A screen that could display colors that human eyes weren't technically capable of processing. The screen flickered to life, text appearing in that uncomfortable shade of blue that existed just past the visible spectrum. Stability, 34%. Bleed, moderate. Anchors, nearby, 0. Temporal coefficient, 0.87. Reality, integrity, questionable. Questionable, Kess repeated, with the dry tone of someone who'd seen that particular reading far too many times. When is it not questionable? They'd been to exit 47 twice before. Once when they first started traveling, 3 months after Sarah disappeared. They'd stumbled through a door in their own bathroom and emerged here, terrified and disoriented, with no idea what had happened or where they were. The second time had been 18 months ago, approaching from a different angle, through a condemned subway tunnel that had branched into 17 different versions of itself. The Between had a way of cycling you through the same spaces, not because it was small, but because it was recursive, fractal, a place where geography folded back on itself like origami made from the concept of location rather than paper. Kess shouldered their messenger bag, weathered canvas covered in patches from places that existed only in the Between. Hotel Infinity, The Last Diner, Terminal C Infinity. Each patch was a reminder, a bookmark, a way to remember which places were which when everything started to blur together. Their jumpsuit had once been a standard mechanic's coverall, gray and practical. Now it was something else, repaired with fabrics from a dozen different realities, each patch a slightly different shade, a slightly different texture. The whole thing had taken on the appearance of a patchwork map, which felt appropriate. They walked across the parking lot. Their footsteps sounded too loud in the silence, each scuff of boot on asphalt echoing longer than it should. The wind whispered through the empty picnic area, carrying with it the smell of hot concrete and something else. Something that might have been ozone, or might have been the olfactory equivalent of static. A sign near the building entrance read, "Welcome travelers, restrooms, vending, information." The letters had faded unevenly, leaving travelers and information brightest, as if the sign had forgotten what its own priorities were supposed to be. The automatic doors sensed Kess's approach and slid open with a pneumatic wheeze that sounded almost like a sigh of resignation. They stepped inside. The interior was exactly as Kess remembered. A small lobby with an information kiosk on the left, its plexiglass windows reflecting the fluorescent lights in streaky patterns. Behind the glass sat racks of brochures advertising attractions that may or may not have ever existed. Visit the infinite caverns. See the house that was never built. Experience the Museum of Future Nostalgia. Kess had learned not to trust the brochures. Half of them led nowhere. The other half led somewhere worse. To the right, a hallway extended toward the restrooms, its walls lined with those terrible motivational posters that government buildings loved. A soaring eagle captioned persistence, a mountain climber reaching a summit with determination written in that aggressive sans serif font that meant someone was taking inspiration very seriously. Straight ahead, 3 vending machines hummed their perpetual chorus. One for sodas, one for snacks, one for sandwiches wrapped in plastic that looked simultaneously fresh and like they'd been sitting there since 1997. Everything was clean. Not hospital clean, but maintained. Floors swept. No dust on the vending machines. No cobwebs in the corners. As if someone, or something, came by regularly to ensure this empty place remained hospitable for visitors who would never come. Except Kess had come, was here, was standing in front of the vending machine, staring at a selection of sodas that included brands they recognized and brands that sounded almost right, but weren't. Coca-Colada, Dr. Thunder's cousin, Sprite 01. From their pocket, Kess pulled out a handful of coins. Currency was complicated in the between. Money from baseline reality, regular quarters, dimes, pennies, sometimes worked, sometimes it didn't. The between seemed to accept coins based on some logic that Kess had never fully decoded. Intention, maybe, or nostalgia, or pure random chance. But Kess had collected other coins too. Their palm held quarters that shimmered between American and Canadian, yen that occasionally looked like euros, tokens from subway systems that had never been built, a silver piece that might have been a Roman denarius, or might have been from a theme park. "Come on," Kess said to the machine. "Just take one of them. They tried a quarter. The machine rejected it with a decisive clunk. Tried another. Rejected. The yen. Rejected. The token. Rejected. The Roman/theme park coin slid in smoothly, and the machine's display lit up. "Thank you. Please make selection." Kess pressed the button for water, the safest choice in any reality. The bottle tumbled down with a satisfying thunk, and Kess retrieved it from the dispenser, unscrewing the cap carefully. They sniffed it first. Water in the between could smell like anything, could taste like anything, could be anything, if you got particularly unlucky. This water smelled like water, maybe with a faint metallic tang, maybe not. Kess took a careful sip. It tasted normal, almost aggressively normal, but with a subtle aftertaste that they couldn't quite identify. It reminded them of Wednesday. Not Wednesday the day, but Wednesday the concept. The feeling of being in the middle of something with no clear sight of either end. From another pocket, Kess pulled out a small notebook, spiral-bound, with a cover that had once been green, but had faded to a color that had no name. The pages were filled with cramped handwriting, sketches, diagrams that looked like they were trying to map something that couldn't be mapped. They flipped to a blank page and wrote, "Exit 47, third time, vending machines work, water tastes like Wednesday, reality stable-ish. No other travelers visible." The notebook was Kess's anchor in the metaphorical sense. The device measured stability and gave readings, but the notebook reminded them who they were. Each entry was a small assertion of continuity. I was here. I observed this. I am still me. I am still capable of recording my experiences in a linear fashion. The handwriting in the early pages was shakier, more frightened. The sketches less precise. Kess could chart their own psychological journey through the degradation of their penmanship and the increasing technical accuracy of their dimensional diagrams. They were about to close the notebook when they heard it. Footsteps echoing from the hallway that led to the restrooms. Kess froze, listening. The sound was wrong. Not the normal tap-tap-tap of shoes on tile, but something more complex. Too many steps, or steps that arrived before they should. Sound preceding motion by a half second. Causality running backward. Slowly, Kess closed the notebook and tucked it away. Their hand moved to the messenger bag, fingers finding the familiar crystalline shape of a flare, one of their emergency tools, cobbled together from materials found in a space that had been simultaneously a hardware store and a cathedral. "I'm not staying," Kess called out, voice steady despite the adrenaline beginning to course through their veins. "Just passing through." The footsteps stopped. Silence rushed in to fill the void, so complete it was almost oppressive. Kess could hear their own heartbeat, the hum of the vending machines, the buzz of the fluorescent lights. Then, from the darkness of the hallway, something emerged. It wasn't quite there, wasn't quite anywhere. It was a person-shaped distortion, like heat shimmer in a human silhouette, edges blurring and refocusing as it moved. Through the distortion, Kess could glimpse fragments of the hallway behind it. But the fragments didn't quite line up correctly, as if multiple versions of the hallway were being overlaid imperfectly. The echo, because Kess knew immediately what this was, drifted forward with movements that didn't quite obey physics. It seemed to slide between positions rather than walking through them. When it spoke, its voice came from multiple directions at once, layered and out of sync, passing through. Everyone's passing through. I don't want any trouble, Kess said, pulling the flare from the bag but keeping it low, not yet threatening. I'm just looking for a door. The echo tilted what might have been its head. As it did, its form flickered, briefly resolving into distinct images. A businessman in a suit from the 1980s, a child in a school uniform, a soldier in fatigues from a war that might not have happened, an astronaut in a suit from a space program that never existed. All there, all overlapping, all the echo. Doors are everywhere, it said, the voices never quite synchronizing. Everywhere is doors. You're standing in one. Kess felt a chill run down their spine. The echo wasn't wrong. In the between, anywhere could become a threshold if you knew how to look at it correctly. The space between two tiles on the floor. The gap between blinks. The moment between heartbeats. All potential doorways if you were desperate enough or lost enough. Last warning, Kess said, raising the flare. The echo moved closer, form continuing to shift and overlay. Warnings don't work here. Here doesn't work. Kess cracked the flare. It broke with a sound like glass and bells and something else, some sound that didn't exist in baseline reality but was perfectly normal here. White light exploded from the crystal, not quite like regular light. This was coherent light, organized light, light that remembered what it meant to illuminate a singular, stable reality. The echo shrieked, a sound like tearing fabric, like static, like a voice that had forgotten which syllable it was supposed to be making. Its form came apart, fragments scattering like disturbed smoke. For just a moment, Kess saw all the individual people it had been, each face distinct and terrified, before they dissipated into nothing. But the light kept going. It was too much, too focused, and the rest stop couldn't handle that much coherent reality being asserted all at once. The walls began to flicker like a bad projection. The vending machines started phasing in and out of existence. The floor developed a transparency, and Kess could see through it to what lay beneath. Nothing. Just empty space. Or filled space. Or space that was trying to decide what it wanted to be. Damn it, Kess hissed. They destabilized the entire space, used too much force. The flare was meant for emergencies, and technically this qualified, but the side effects were always unpredictable. Sometimes you'd collapse a pocket reality and fall through to another one. Sometimes you'd just erase yourself from that particular configuration of space and pop out somewhere random. Sometimes, rarely, thankfully, you'd create a cascade failure and drag yourself down through multiple layers of reality at once, emerging somewhere so deep in the between that finding your way back became nearly impossible. Kess ran. They bolted for the exit, the automatic doors sliding open too slowly. Behind them, the rest stop was coming apart. Walls going transparent, ceiling lowering and rising simultaneously, the dimensions of the space folding in on themselves like a dying star. Outside, the parking lot was doing the same thing. The asphalt beneath Kess's boots shifted texture with each step. Cracked pavement becoming smooth new road, becoming dirt, becoming something that looked like television static made solid, each footfall landing on a different surface. Kess yanked out the device. Its screen was going haywire, text scrolling too fast to read, warning lights flashing in colors that hurt to look at. But through the chaos, a synthetic voice emerged. Stability critical. Recommend immediate anchor or threshold crossing. Reality coefficient dropping below sustainable levels. Recommend... Yeah, thanks, Kess shouted, still running. Super helpful. The highway ahead was splitting, or rather, multiple versions of itself were becoming visible simultaneously. There was the cracked, aging highway from moments ago. A pristine new highway that might have been from 2050 or 2025 or yesterday. A dirt road that predated asphalt entirely. A path made of smooth stones. A route paved with something that glittered like crushed stars. All of them occupying the same space. All equally real and equally unreal. Kess didn't slow down. From the messenger bag, they pulled out a pair of goggles, another modified piece of equipment. These ones starting life as welding goggles, but now fitted with lenses ground from glass that had never fully decided whether it was solid or liquid. The lenses shifted constantly, never quite focusing, capable of filtering reality in ways that human eyes couldn't naturally manage. Kess jammed the goggles onto their face. The world through the lenses was a nightmare of overlapping geometries, but it also revealed what was hidden: the stable paths, the strong thresholds, the roots that would actually hold together long enough to walk on. One of the highway branches glowed faintly blue through the lenses. Blue meant stable. Blue meant coherent. Blue meant that version of the highway had more reality mass than the others. There, Kess gasped, angling toward it. As soon as they committed to that path, reality started to collapse back into singularity. The other versions of the highway faded, leaving only the one Kess had chosen, except now it was different. Older, maybe. The asphalt was darker. The faded paint lines were yellower. Or maybe it was from somewhere else entirely. Some parallel track where highway maintenance had different standards. Kess ran for another 30 seconds before they trusted themselves to slow down. Behind them, Exit 47 had vanished completely, taking its imploded pocket reality with it. The rest stop was gone. The parking lot was gone. Just highway now, stretching in both directions, disappearing into distance. But something was wrong. Well, more wrong than usual. The highway beneath their feet should have felt solid, but it felt thin, precarious, like running on ice that was about to crack. Kess looked down through the goggles and saw why. The highway was fading, losing cohesion. They jumped from one unstable space to another, and this one was collapsing too. And then the highway just ended, not gradually. One moment Kess was running on asphalt. The next their boot came down on polished floor tile. They stumbled, caught themselves, looked up. They were in a shopping mall. Part 2. The Mall and the Pilot. The highway didn't end. It didn't transition. It simply became a mall corridor. No boundary, no threshold, no door. The asphalt just stopped being asphalt and started being a wide hallway, flanked by darkened storefronts, as if this were the most natural transition in the world. Kess pulled off the goggles, letting them hang around their neck. The mall stretched in both directions, massive, empty, clean in that eerie way that abandoned places in the between always were. Skylights overhead let in a light that might have been sunlight, but probably wasn't, casting long shadows from planters that held trees that were simultaneously alive and long dead. The stores on either side had their metal security gates pulled down, but through the gaps, Kess could see mannequins in fashion from multiple eras, shelves stocked with products that flickered between brands. One store that looked like it sold books had shelves that seemed to recede endlessly into impossible depth. Music played from hidden speakers, instrumental versions of songs that Kess almost recognized. The melody would start familiar, triggering that sense of, oh, I know this one, but then it would slide sideways into something that had never been composed. A harmony that made no musical sense, but somehow felt correct. Kess's footsteps echoed as they walked. The mall felt larger than it should, but that meant nothing here. Space was optional in the between, negotiable. They passed a fountain that ran upward, water emerging from the pool below and flowing up to spouts in a sculpture above, defying gravity with casual disregard. The water caught the weird, not quite sunlight and threw prismatic reflections across the floor. A directory board stood at an intersection of corridors. Kess approached it, studying the map. The mall layout looked normal enough at first glance, a typical sprawling complex with anchor stores at the corners and smaller shops filling the spaces between. But the store names were wrong. The gap between. Forever 21 Seconds. Hot Topography. Orange Julius Caesar. Barnes and Noble Truths. Some were puns. Some were just off. Some seemed to be describing what they actually were. Which way to a stable threshold? Kess asked the directory, not really expecting an answer. The map flickered. Text rearranged itself. And then an arrow appeared on the screen, pointing deeper into the mall, toward what the directory now labeled as departure gates. Kess stared at the arrow for a long moment. The between didn't usually help. It wasn't malevolent. It wasn't anything, really. It just was. But it didn't typically offer assistance. The fact that the directory had responded was unusual, potentially troubling. But Kess was running out of options. The stability reading on their device was still dropping. They needed a strong threshold soon, or they'd end up stuck in whatever space they were in when reality mass reached critical low. That'll do, Kess muttered and followed the arrow. The corridor stretched longer than it should have, Kess passed more stores, some with their security gates up, interiors visible and strangely inviting. A bookstore where the books rearranged themselves on the shelves when Kess wasn't looking directly at them. A clothing store where the mannequins slowly turned their heads to track Kess's movement. A toy store where a music box was playing itself, the tinkling melody echoing out into the corridor. None of it was overtly threatening. That was almost worse. The between could be dangerous, but the dangerous parts usually announce themselves. These quiet moments, when everything seemed normal, except for the subtle wrongnesses, were when you had to be most careful. The fountain sound faded behind Kess, replaced by something else, a distant humming, like machinery running in the walls, or like the building itself was breathing. The corridor opened up into a larger space, and Kess stopped dead. It wasn't a store. It was an airport gate waiting area, somehow transplanted wholesale into the mall. Rows of those uncomfortable molded plastic chairs faced floor-to-ceiling windows, the kind that should have looked out onto a tarmac. Gates. Planes. Instead, the windows looked out onto nothing. Not darkness, not light, not even void. Just the complete absence of anything. Looking at it made Kess's eyes hurt in a way that had nothing to do with optics and everything to do with the human brain refusing to process something that shouldn't be processable. Kess tore their gaze away from the windows and scanned the waiting area. Empty. Just like number. Not empty. In the far corner, sitting perfectly upright in one of the chairs, was another person. They were wearing what looked like a pilot's uniform, navy blue with gold epaulets, crisp and professional, except for the fact that the airline logo on the chest was a symbol that kept changing, cycling through logos that might have belonged to Pan Am or TWA or something else that never existed. The pilot was reading a newspaper, pages crackling with each turn. Kess approached cautiously. As they got closer, they could see the newspaper's headline change with each blink. Markets rise to impossible heights, then yesterday postponed indefinitely. Then local man discovers he never existed. The pilot looked up as Kess approached. They were in their 40s, maybe, with kind eyes that held a deep weariness that Kess recognized immediately, the exhaustion that came from spending too long in the between. "You waiting for a flight?" Kess asked, stopping a few seats away. The pilot smiled slightly, setting down the newspaper. "Always waiting. Never comes. But I keep my schedule." Their voice was raspy, like they hadn't spoken in a long time, or like they'd been speaking continuously for so long that their voice had worn thin. "How long have you been here?" 3 days, or 30 years. Hard to tell. The pilot gestured vaguely at the waiting area. Time's more of a suggestion in the between. Kess felt a jolt of recognition at the term. "You know where you are then. You're a traveler?" The pilot finally looked directly at Kess, and there was something profound in that gaze, a shared understanding, a kinship of the lost. Got stuck. Happens to all of us eventually. You burn through too many thresholds. use too many flares, and one day you find yourself in a waiting room that never ends. They gestured to the empty seat beside them, and Kess sat, keeping a respectful distance. The chair was exactly as uncomfortable as it looked. "You still have the look, though," the pilot continued. "Fresh. How long you been traveling?" 4 years, maybe 5. Lost count after I crossed through the inverted city. The pilot whistled low. 4 years. That's good. That's really good. Most people don't last 6 months. They either find their way out or they become echoes. Kess stiffened. The thing at the rest stop. Echo. Used to be a traveler like us. Got lost in the shifting. Forgot which version of themselves was real. The pilot's voice was matter-of-fact, but sad. Now they're all of them and none of them. Probably been traveling even longer than me. 20 years maybe. 30. Hard to say. At some point, they just came apart. Lost the thread of their own narrative. Kess pulled out their device, checking the readings again. Stability, 29%. Each percentage point felt precious now. They tried to imagine what it would be like to hit 0, to lose cohesion the way the echo had, to fragment into every version of yourself that ever was or might have been, existing simultaneously, unable to coalesce back into a singular being. "I need to find a threshold," Kess said. "A real one. Something that leads back to baseline reality." The pilot picked up their newspaper again, but didn't open it. Why would you want to go back? Nothing there but linear time and consequence. Gravity that always points down. Sunrises that always follow sunsets. So boring. So predictable. "Because I'm looking for someone," Kess said quietly. "And they're not here. They're there." The pilot's expression softened. They folded the impossible newspaper carefully, as if it were precious. A passenger, then, not just a wanderer. That's different. They stood up, stretching with the careful movements of someone whose body had been sitting too long. There's a threshold 2 levels up. Old movie theater. Shows films that haven't been made yet. Some of them haven't even been thought of. If you can find the right showing, the emergency exit in Theater 7 leads out. Out where? Not to your home exactly, but closer. Maybe. Probably. The pilot shrugged. Reality topology is complicated. You don't go straight from here to there. You move asymptotically. Each threshold gets you closer to baseline, but you never quite arrive. It's like trying to reach absolute 0. You can get near, but the last few degrees are impossible. "Why are you telling me this?" Kess asked, standing as well. "If you're stuck here, why help me?" The pilot smiled, and there was genuine warmth in it. "Because I can't use it anymore. Too far gone. But you..." They pointed at the floor. Kess looked down. Their shadow was there, perfectly normal, cast by the weird mall lighting, except it did seem to lag very slightly behind their movements. A half-second delay between action and shadow, as if the darkness hadn't quite gotten the memo that Kess had moved. Your shadow still matches your feet, the pilot said. When it starts moving on its own, you're in trouble. Mine stopped following me around 2 years ago, or 20 years ago. Time's funny here. Now it wanders off sometimes. Comes back eventually, but it's always gone a little longer each time. Soon it won't come back at all, and that's when I'll know I'm truly stuck. Kess felt a chill. They'd seen their shadow do strange things in the between, stretch too long, split into multiples, fade to nothing, but it had always matched their movements. Always. The day it didn't. Go, the pilot said, before this gate decides to board. As if summoned by the words, the PA system crackled to life with a burst of static that resolved into a voice, gender-neutral, emotionless, speaking with the cadence of every airport announcement ever made. Now boarding Flight 404 to nowhere. All passengers proceeding to gate error. This is a final boarding call for all passengers to nowhere. The gate will close in no time at all. The windows, looking out onto nothing, began to fill with something. Not quite light, not quite substance, but a presence that pressed against the glass like fog trying to get in, or like the nothing outside was trying to become something, and doing a very poor job of it. The pilot sat back down in their chair, resignation settling over their features like a familiar coat. They picked up the newspaper again, opening it to a page full of text that Kess couldn't read from this distance. Text that might have been news, or might have been poetry, or might have been the same word repeated infinitely. Come with me, Kess said suddenly, surprising themselves with the offer. The pilot looked up, and for a moment their expression was grateful, genuinely touched. Can't. My boarding pass was punched a long time ago, but thanks for asking. Been a while since someone did. How long? 3 days. Or 30 years. Kess wanted to say something else, to offer more help, to insist, but they could see it in the pilot's eyes. The acceptance, the tired certainty. They were part of this place now, integrated. To leave would be like asking a fish to walk on land. Good luck, Kess said finally. You too. Watch your shadow. And if you find your passenger, the pilot paused, considering. Make sure you recognize them. The between has a way of showing you what you want to see. Echoes can be very convincing. Kess nodded, committing the warning to memory, and ran for the exit. Behind them, the PA system continued. Passengers should be aware that nowhere is experiencing typical conditions. The weather at our destination is currently everything and nothing. Thank you for flying Impossible Airlines. The corridor beyond the gate waiting area was darker, the mall lights dimmed or broken. Kess ran anyway, checking the device periodically. Stability, 26%, dropping faster now. The storefronts on this level were stranger. One had a window display showing items that couldn't exist. A Klein bottle full of music, a perpetual motion machine that had stopped, a mirror that reflected tomorrow instead of today. Another store's interior seemed to be rotating slowly. Shelves and merchandise doing a lazy barrel roll in defiance of physics. Kess passed a food court where the smell of cooking food emerged from restaurants that had never served a customer, wafting scents of pizza and teriyaki, and something that smelled like nostalgia made edible. An escalator appeared ahead, and Kess nearly laughed with relief. Up. They needed to go up 2 levels. But as they approached, they saw the problem. The escalator was going both directions at once. The steps were simultaneously rising and descending, each stair existing in superposition, quantum escalator mechanics that made no sense, but somehow didn't tear the machinery apart. Kess pulled the goggles back on. Through the lenses, they could see the true paths, the stairs that were mostly going up, with only a slight downward component. Good enough. They timed their jump, leaping onto a stair that was 70% ascending, and rode the impossible machinery upward. The sensation was dizzying, like being on an elevator that couldn't decide what floor it was going to. But Kess kept their balance, gripping the rail that was also going both ways and neither. Second level. The mall here was darker still, more abandoned. The lights flickered between colors that shouldn't be visible to human eyes, infrared, ultraviolet, and things that had no place on the electromagnetic spectrum. Kess's device beeped urgently. Warning, reality coefficient dropping. Anchor recommended. Stability, 22%. Warning, coherence declining. I know, Kess muttered, jogging now. The third level access had to be nearby. They spotted another escalator, this one blessedly singular in its direction, and took the steps 2 at a time. Third level. The cinema complex was immediately visible, impossible to miss. A massive structure that somehow fit inside the mall. Its facade Art Deco architecture from the 1930s merged with chrome and neon from the 1980s. The infinite theater spelled out in marquee lights that cycled through colors. Below the main sign, a smaller marquee read, "Now showing Everything and Nothing." Kess approached the entrance. The glass doors were unlocked, swinging open at a touch. Inside, a standard movie theater lobby greeted them. The kind that had probably looked exactly the same in 1,000 multiplexes across baseline reality. Red carpet with abstract gold patterns. A concession stand to the left. Poster frames lining the walls. Ropes cordoning off the ticket collection point. But the posters advertised impossible films. The prequel to your birth. The sequel to the concept of sequels. Trilogy Part 4. Remake of an original idea. The cinematic universe that never was. Behind the concession stand, no employee. But fresh popcorn was popping itself in the machine. Kernels exploding into white puffs with mathematically perfect timing. Candy in the display case arranged and rearranged itself into patterns. Geometric, then random, then geometric again. Kess ignored the concession stand and walked to a digital board showing current films and showtimes. Theater 1, Yesterday's Tomorrow. Runtime, -37 minutes. Next showing, Never. Theater 3, The Sound of Silence. Runtime, Infinity. Next showing, Always. Theater 5, The Film You Forgot. Runtime, The Length of a Memory. Next showing, just missed it. Theater 7, Exodus. Runtime, now. Next showing, now. Theater 7, Exodus, exit. The theater naming was a bit on the nose, but Kess wasn't in a position to criticize. They headed down the corridor marked Theaters 6 through 10, past doors that leaked sounds impossible to source. From Theater 1, laughter that had never started, a sound loop that began in the middle and never reached a punchline. From Theater 3, dialogue in a language that might have been English or might have been something pretending to be English. Words that had the cadence of meaning but no actual content. From Theater 5, a soundtrack that shifted genres mid-note, orchestra becoming jazz, becoming heavy metal, becoming silence, becoming something that predated music entirely. Theater 7's door was unremarkable. Just a plain door marked with a brass 7. Kess pushed through. The theater was massive, far larger than should fit in the building, even accounting for impossible geometry. Rows and rows of seats descended toward a screen that filled the entire front wall, easily 50 feet tall, maybe more. The seats were empty. On the screen, static played, but not the random static of a dead channel. This static had patterns, currents, occasionally resolving into images for just a moment before dissolving back into noise. Kess caught glimpses as they descended the aisle, a street corner that might have been from their hometown, a kitchen that looked familiar, a face. They stopped dead, staring at the screen. The face had resolved clearly for half a second. Sarah, younger than Kess remembered, smiling, turning to say something that was lost in the static. "Wait!" Kess called out to the screen. "Come back!" But the static continued, indifferent. Shapes moved through it. Might have been people, might have been memories, might have been nothing at all. Kess checked the device. Stability, 18%. Time was running out. The emergency exit sign glowed on the far side of the theater, a beacon of green LED reliability. Kess started down the aisle, boots soundless on the plush carpet. And then the seats began to fill. Not quickly, not dramatically, just gradually, the way a theater fills before a popular movie. Translucent figures materialized in the seats, one by one, sitting still, facing forward, watching the static as if it were the greatest film ever made. They weren't quite ghosts, weren't quite holograms. They were impressions of people, echoes of echoes, the kind of presence that suggested someone had sat there so many times. Kess kept walking, eyes fixed on the exit sign. Don't engage. Don't acknowledge. In the between, attention was currency, and you didn't want to spend it on things that might not be real. But then one of the figures turned to look at them. It was Marsh, the pilot from the gate waiting area, but not quite. This version was younger, wearing a leather jacket instead of a uniform. Or maybe older, graying at the temples. Or both. Or neither. The figure flickered between states. "This isn't real," Kess said, not stopping. "What is?" the Marsh figure replied. Its voice the same raspy tone but multiplied, coming from multiple mouths that appeared and disappeared in the flickering form. More figures turned now. All of them marsh. Hundreds of marshes in different clothes, different ages, different states of being. All watching Kess with those weary, kind eyes. "You can't leave," they said in unison, a chorus of one person spread across infinite variations. "None of us can leave. This is the exit. The exit is everywhere. Everywhere is exit." The aisle stretched. Kess was running now. But the emergency exit sign wasn't getting closer. The theater was doing what spaces in the between did when they didn't want to let you go. Expanding, folding, creating distance where distance shouldn't exist. Kess glanced down at their shadow. It was lagging behind by a full second now, boots falling on carpet that the shadow hadn't reached yet. Not good. Not good at all. "I'm not staying," Kess shouted, pulling out another flare. They'd only had 3 to start with. Used one at the rest stop. This would be the second. One left after this. The marsh echoes stood up as one, hundreds of figures rising from the seats. "Don't go. Stay and watch. The movie is almost over. The movie is just beginning. The movie is the watching itself." Kess cracked the flare. White light exploded through the theater, and this time they were ready for the consequences. As the coherent reality burst from the crystal, Kess sprinted, using the moment of destabilization to cover ground that shouldn't be coverable. The marsh echoes screamed, that fabric-tearing sound multiplied by hundreds, and dissolved. The seats began to flicker. The screen went white, then black, then showed images too rapidly to process. Every film ever made and every film never made, compressed into a strobe of meaning and meaninglessness. But the exit was closer. Kess could see it now, really see it. The green sign bright and steady and wonderfully, beautifully mundane.